The amount of rhythm games that exist today and the amount that continue to be made is actually pretty impressive when you think about it. You have a myriad of games that are meant for your keyboard, some require a specific controller to use, some can be touchscreen, or they provide some of the most interesting concepts you can think of. This is very refreshing to see, as this is one of the key elements of what a new rhythm game should do: provide a unique concept and execute it in the most presentable and accessible way possible. Some of these games over time tend to lose interest with their audience though, as while a new rhythm game is very exciting at first, people will start to notice the flaws within the game, and if they are too overbearing and ruin the initial excitement the game once brought, their interest will diminish substantially. I'm going to go over some key elements to what I believe a rhythm game should include, as I believe there are a lot of fundamental aspects rhythm games miss, and most games are missing some of these to some degree. I will be using various rhythm games to exemplify my points, mostly ones that I am pretty familiar with for multiple examples. I enjoy all these rhythm games quite a bit, whether it is from a spectator or a player perspective, so please do not feel like I am targeting any of them. Without further ado, let's begin Rhythm Game Design 101. Mods are going to take up the bulk of this video, and we'll break this up with each modification at a time. Rhythm games in general should provide plenty of mods or settings to begin with, as everyone has their own threshold for how comfortable they can read something. This is a bit more tricky and perhaps not as applicable to games like Re-Rave or MaiMai, but it definitely applies to a great majority. Instead of a player simply getting used to how the game is presented and subjecting them to a fixed or restricted way of playing the game, players should be allowed to modify the playing field to their liking, of course without drastically changing the game itself. The first mod I'd like to go over is the speed mod. Speed mods should be able to be changed by pretty specific increments. In a game like ITG, DDR, Eterna, Sound Voltex, and others, a speed mod change of 5 or 10, or 0.25 in DDR, can make a tremendous difference in reading, and this allows for players to adjust their speed mod as specifically as possible to ensure they are reading at the correct speed. Some games, however, present the game at a fixed reading speed. Take Taiko for example. The speed the notes come are entirely dependent on the BPM of the song, and this gives advantages and disadvantages to all sorts of players who may have naturally different reading abilities. While reading fast and reading slow can be a learned process, it is still unfair conceptually to force players to read at a certain BPM for the entire song, or to not be able to set a specific base speed mod to use in case the song does speed up or slow down. It's one thing if it's like DDR where there are varying BPMs at times, but the game still allows you to select some sort of speed multiplier to choose how fast you want to read those notes throughout the whole song, even with varying BPMs. A customizable speed mod would simply just be more efficient in providing all players a fair playing ground, as reading the speed the notes come onto the screen is a completely subjective concept that varies between each player. The size of the notes is also extremely important in providing the player the tools they need to succeed at their game. If a player from ITG that is used to reading smaller notes using the mini mod wanted to transition to DDR, they would be forced to read the notes on a larger scale and would either consciously or subconsciously feel a bit off with their play, and would have to adjust on and off between games if they wanted to do so. Some people even like to have their notes bigger than the game provides too. In games like Clone Hero, Eterna, and Osimania, some players will actually increase the size of their playing field or use a theme with bigger notes, and players should certainly have that option to do so if it feels more natural to them to play that way. The direction of the notes is something that a lot of rhythm games don't seem to allow you to change. A good majority of these rely on the notes scrolling downwards, and offering no alternative. As someone who is much more comfortable with having the notes scroll upwards in their games, after trying out downscroll for quite some time in DDR in my younger years, I still found having the notes scroll upwards to feel naturally more comfortable for me. This is simply not offered in games like Clone Hero, BMS, O2 Jam, Poppin' Music, and many more. And while I've gotten fairly used to downscroll oriented rhythm games, it still just doesn't feel as natural. Even for something like Taiko, I feel at the very least players should have the option to switch their reading from left to right, instead of having it only right to left. Perhaps a bit too nitpicky in that case, but I feel like the option to do so should still be offered. All of this is especially important for newer players of the game, as players can experiment early and try out what works best for them over time, instead of simply dealing with what the game offers and potentially hindering their skill progression curve as a result. This one is a bit tricky because some games can lose their initial charm. Upscroll and Poppin' Music may look fairly harmless compared to how peculiar Upscroll and Clone Hero would look, but it would definitely be interesting to see how developers could implement these features if possible. Rate mods, frequency, speed mod, whatever your version is, are one of the most fascinating things you can utilize and allows the player to more or less create more content for them to play. Or they can use it as a training tool to improve at certain speeds that easier songs might not offer. Adjustable rate mods in 0.05 or 0.1 increments would be such a great addition to so many rhythm games, and would provide players to explore the game in more ways than they were able to before. I noted in a previous video with a game like Osu, there's so much potential for players to improve at a much more consistent rate if they have the ability to choose a rate mod aside from the very limited halftime and double time mods the game offers, and virtually any other game would receive similar benefits as well with this option. Backgrounds should absolutely be able to be toggled on and off. Games like DJ Max and DDR can have quite distracting backgrounds at times, and even if in DDR you can isolate your playing field, players should be able to toggle either a video, static, or simply no background, or should even have the ability to determine how much of a background they would like dimmed, similar to how Osu does it. Timing windows should provide a reasonable window for the tightest window relative to what the game's scoring focus is, and should provide reasonable scaling when going down to looser and looser windows. If a game's timing windows are far too tight, the game is extremely inaccessible and will be very rough for newcomers. If the timing windows are too large, players will not feel as inclined to improve or engage themselves with the game and will become uninterested over time as a result. Some games simply have one timing window, and that is also fine as well, as long as the window is reasonable and players are punished properly for being outside said timing window. Timing windows should also be consistent with the game unless a modifier of some sort is intentionally used, such as Osu Hard Rock mod or the varying judges in Eterna, but they shouldn't just randomly change throughout every song, as this just creates inconsistency in how the game is played. Lastly, these timing windows should also be symmetrical, meaning the same window for how late a player hits the note and how early a player hits a note should be the exact same. A player should never feel incentivized to hit intentionally early or intentionally late. Players will obviously do these things regardless, but it still doesn't change the notion that timing windows should be symmetrical. Aesthetics are actually something that are a lot more important than people think. It's nice to have a game that is built to run and play efficiently, but when the settings, song selection screen, etc. aren't exactly the most enticing to look at, it can be quite a turnoff for players, especially newer ones. A game like Eterna suffers from this greatly and provides very minimal graphical qualities overall, making it a bit harder to excite brand new players. Reasonably sized, flashy, easy to read buttons make for a very comfortable experience, and the amount of clutter on the screen should be minimized as much as possible too. Menus and options should be very accessible and easy to understand, with each aspect of these options being explained concisely when necessary. Simply Love theme for ITG is a fantastic example. It's pretty, the buttons and numbers are big, and everything is just easy to find and explains things when needed. Offset adjustments can be a painstaking process at times, and the only game I've actually found to nail this on the head is really anything that runs on a StepMania client. While you should be able to adjust your offset to the absolute millisecond, you should also be able to set your offset by playing the notes to the actual beat of the song, and when the game takes that sample of notes, it also adjusts your global or specific song offset based off of that sample mid-game. This can be troublesome for perhaps newer players of the game who can't hit super accurately, so they would simply resort to the first method. But the sample method has proven to be extremely useful, and I'm quite surprised I've seen virtually no other game besides Guitar Hero's video offset function use this. Rhythm games are meant to be unique in their own way and should provide a genuine experience that makes players want to play that game over and over again. And all of the rhythm games I've used as examples have done a great job at that, and there's a reason why people enjoy them so much. These games, in my opinion, however, should incorporate at least some of these key elements that will allow the player to have much more liberation with how they want to play the game, and with the constant development of some of these games, it would be pretty amazing to see some of them in action, and would create healthier development and more opportunities too. I believe that rhythm games should be versatile in providing the player all the tools they need to succeed, and have fun without necessarily changing the charm of the game, and I think that's entirely possible with a lot of these games. This is certainly easier said than done though. I know I probably haven't covered everything, but that is where I'm going to hand it off to you guys. Which elements of a rhythm game do you think almost all rhythm games should have, and why do you think they should be implemented? I'm very curious to see your guys' inputs on this. Thank you to all of my patrons for supporting the channel, and if you would like to support the channel yourself, feel free to check out my Patreon along with my other links below. I'll see you all in whatever video I upload next, and take care.